Details about the 63-year-old grandmother who was reported missing this month. Metro Police confirmed to Fox 5 they discovered Alisa Goods' body yesterday near Harry Reid Airport.
14 days after Alisa Goods vanished, her family was still getting texts from her phone. First, it was a request for gas money. Then it turned into Bitcoin. Her son picked up a call from that same number. Her niece answered messages too. Whoever was texting knew enough about the situation to keep the family engaged and hopeful. Investigators later determined that by the time those messages started, Goods had already stopped moving. Surveillance footage would eventually show her collapsing 4 days before the first text was ever sent. She was found less than 50 feet from a public roadway, in a spot that could not be seen from the street. For 2 weeks, her family and search crews covered that same area, calling hospitals, checking with jails, driving the city with flyers, without knowing how close they'd already come. Police have given an initial explanation: she fell. But that explanation leaves a lot open. It doesn't account for how she ended up miles from the pharmacy she was walking to. It doesn't explain who had access to her phone for 4 days after she was no longer using it. And it hasn't stopped her family from asking what actually happened in between. This is the case of Alisa Goods, and this video covers the confirmed facts, the investigation, and what's still unresolved. Some details involve her death and the exploitation of her family while she was missing, so consider this your heads up if that's difficult for you to watch. If you're new here, this is CrimeWise. Subscribing gets you the update the moment the coroner's office releases a cause of death, which at the time of filming still hasn't happened. Here's where the case starts. Alisa Goods left Roger John's apartment near Maryland Parkway and Tropicana Avenue at around 1:40 in the afternoon on August 8th. She was headed to a CVS on Paradise Road and Harmon Avenue, a walk and a bus ride away, to pick up iron pills. That errand, according to everyone who has spoken publicly about that day, was the entire plan. Nothing more complicated than a quick trip to a pharmacy and back. She was last seen wearing black Adidas sweatpants and a blue denim jacket, spotted near the 4900 block of South Maryland Parkway. That description became the basis for the missing person flyers distributed across the city in the days that followed, and it remains the last documented visual record of her before everything that happened next. Roger John was the last person to see her. He had known her for 20 years, and this wasn't her first visit to stay with him in Las Vegas. He told reporters afterward that he watched her go down the stairs of his apartment building that afternoon. He said goodbye. She said she'd see him later. Neither of them treated it as anything unusual, because there was no reason to. When she didn't come back that evening, John said he wasn't immediately concerned. He told Class TV that it wasn't out of character for her to spend hours out shopping, and that on past visits, she'd taken buses around the city on her own without any issue. It was only as more time passed, with no response to his calls or texts, that he began to worry. He eventually reached out to her family directly, rather than contacting police himself right away. This is where the timeline needs a correction, because public reporting has been inconsistent on it. Alisa Goods disappeared on August 8th. She was not reported missing until 2 days later, on August 10th. That gap matters for understanding how the search unfolded from here, and it's worth stating clearly now, so the rest of this timeline makes sense as we move forward. Roger John has since been ruled out as a suspect by investigators. There has been no public statement connecting him to what happened to her, and nothing in his account has changed since he first gave it to reporters. In the weeks that followed, he was one of the people helping distribute flyers around Las Vegas as the search expanded outward, working alongside her family rather than being treated as part of the mystery himself. He described her, in his own words, as the nicest person you would meet. That's the last first-hand account anyone has offered of Alisa Goods functioning normally, going about an ordinary afternoon, expecting to be back within the hour, with no indication that anything was about to go wrong. From that point at 1:40 p.m. on August 8th, there is a gap. No one has publicly accounted for what happened between her leaving that building and whatever came next. That gap, more than anything else in this case, is where the real story actually begins. With no word from Alisa Goods and no answers from Roger John's calls or texts, her family began working the phones themselves. They contacted hospitals across the Las Vegas Valley, one after another, asking if a woman matching her description had been brought in recently. They called local jails, in case she had been picked up or detained for any reason during those first confusing days. They even reached out to the coroner's office directly, working through the possibility no family wants to consider, just to rule it out early, rather than let it sit unanswered. Every call came back the same way. No match, no record of her anywhere in the system. Her daughter, Kristen Goods, flew to Las Vegas to search in person, rather than coordinate from a distance. She walked areas of the city herself, helped distribute flyers, and pushed local media and police for any information they could share. Kristen later confirmed publicly that her mother had recently undergone multiple surgeries, procedures that made walking considerably harder on this particular trip than it would have been on previous visits to the city. That detail would matter more later, but at this stage it directly shaped how the family understood the danger she could be facing while missing and unable to easily move on her own. Alisa's sister, Mielle Stone, became one of the most visible voices during the search. When asked directly whether she feared her sister had been taken for ransom, Stone didn't dismiss the possibility. She said yes, she did fear that. She also said, plainly, that the family didn't have money to pay if that turned out to be the situation. It was an uncomfortable answer to give publicly, but it reflected where the family's thinking had gone by that point in the search. Alisa's niece, Alana Calloway, was the third family member central to this stretch of the case. She stayed closely connected to the search efforts and to the flow of information coming in, including the messages that would soon start arriving from her aunt's phone. Calloway's role in this story becomes more significant shortly, but her presence in the search itself, alongside Kristen and Mielle, was constant from early on. For nearly 2 weeks, this was the rhythm of the case. Hospitals contacted and cleared. Jails contacted and cleared. Flyers posted around neighborhoods, gas stations, and bus stops across the valley. A family splitting its time between organizing a search on the ground and waiting for any single piece of information that might change things. None of it produced her. Not a sighting, a lead, or a body. Just a growing search radius, a family running out of places left to call, and a new complication that was about to make everything harder to understand. 4 days after Alisa Goods disappeared, her phone came back to life. On August 12th, messages started arriving to family members from her own number, asking for help with gas money. It was the kind of request that could plausibly come from her, which is exactly what made it effective. Someone was in trouble, needed a small amount of cash, and reached out to people who loved her and wanted to help. Except she hadn't been heard from in 4 days, and nobody had confirmed where she actually was. The request didn't stay small. The ask shifted from gas money to Bitcoin, a currency Alisa Goods had no history of using and no apparent reason to request. That shift is what moved this from a strange coincidence to something the family started treating as deliberate. Her niece, Alana Calloway, was one of the first to respond, and she said almost immediately that something felt wrong. She later described the moment publicly, saying it wasn't her aunt texting, and that the realization took her breath away. That reaction wasn't hesitation or overthinking. It was recognition, fast and certain, that whoever was on the other end of that conversation wasn't the woman she knew. The clearest piece of evidence came through a phone call, not a text. Alisa's son received a call from her number, and rather than simply talking through it, he recorded part of the conversation. On that recording, the caller identified themselves as Alisa, but when family members reviewed it, they were certain of one thing: the voice did not belong to her. That distinction matters, because it moves this from a suspicious pattern of messages into a much more concrete piece of evidence. A voice can be misheard, a recording can be compared and confirmed. The family brought all of this to Las Vegas police: the texts, the recorded call, and everything they'd noticed about the timing and tone of the messages. For a period during the search, This left open a genuinely disturbing possibility that Alisa was alive somewhere, being controlled or monitored by someone using her phone to stall her family and buy time. It's part of why the 2 weeks of searching carried the weight they did, and why the family kept engaging with the messages rather than ignoring them outright. Since then, police have offered a more specific explanation. Investigators now believe the messages were most likely sent by scammers using spoofing technology, a method that lets someone display a different number as the sender, making it appear the messages came directly from Alisa's phone, rather than a device the family could trace. Under this theory, whoever sent those messages may have had no connection at all to what happened to her, and simply exploited a number they had access to once they became aware a search was underway. That explanation accounts for the mechanism. It does not fully explain how someone gained access to her specific number, or why they knew enough about the situation to sound convincing across a call and multiple messages. For the family, knowing that the messages were likely a scam has not closed the door on their unease. It has simply shifted the question from who took her to who found her phone and how. At 1:45 in the morning on Thursday, nearly 2 weeks into the search, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department received a call reporting a deceased woman in a drainage ditch area near Wayne Newton Boulevard, close to the Terminal 1 parking garage at Harry Reid International Airport. The call had come in during the overnight hours, the kind of report dispatch logs without knowing yet exactly who officers are about to find at the scene. Officers responded and located the woman at the reported location. She was later formally identified as Alisa Goods, bringing an end to a search that had stretched across nearly 2 full weeks. The location itself explains a great deal about why she hadn't been found sooner. According to the department's own account, her position in that drainage ditch could not be seen from the street, not by someone walking past, not by someone driving by, not by search volunteers covering that general area on foot. This wasn't a case of the search missing an obvious spot. It was a case of the terrain itself, concealing her from anyone above street level, regardless of how thoroughly that stretch of the city had been checked. That detail carries weight when placed against everything the family had already done. For close to 2 weeks, they had called hospitals, contacted jails, distributed flyers, and driven sections of Las Vegas looking for any sign of her. It's entirely possible search efforts came within a short distance of that location without any way of knowing it, simply because the spot itself was built to be missed from any normal vantage point. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department has handled the case from this point forward as the primary agency investigating what happened. Their statement following the discovery was limited to the essential facts: the time of the call, the location of the discovery, and the observation about visibility from the street. No cause of death was announced. No manner of death was announced. The department's public account, at this stage, sticks strictly to what officers found and where they found it, leaving the interpretation of how she got there for the next phase of the investigation. What comes next in this case rests almost entirely on a separate piece of evidence, one that police say puts a specific date and a specific sequence of events to what happened to her, long before that early morning call ever came in. The piece of evidence that changed how investigators understood this case wasn't found at the scene. It came from a review of surveillance footage from the airport, footage that had existed since the day Alisa Goods disappeared, but wasn't connected to her until after her body was found. According to Las Vegas police, the footage is dated August 8th, the same afternoon she left Roger John's apartment. It shows a woman investigators believe to be Alisa falling down an embankment near the area where she was eventually located. She gets back up, then she collapses again. Police say no further movement was observed after that point. If that footage is accurately dated and correctly identifies her, it means the outcome of this case was determined within hours of her leaving to run a simple errand, not gradually over the 2 weeks her family spent searching for her. That raises an immediate question. If this footage existed from day one, why did it take investigators roughly 2 weeks to review it and connect it to Alisa Goods? Surveillance systems at a facility the size of Harry Reid International Airport cover an enormous amount of ground, and footage isn't typically pulled and reviewed unless investigators already have a specific reason to look at a particular place and time. It's a gap the department hasn't publicly explained in detail, and it's worth naming plainly here rather than passing over it quietly. There are two other factors worth putting directly alongside this footage, because both are documented, and neither is speculation. Alisa Goods confirmed that her mother had recently undergone multiple surgeries that made walking considerably harder on this trip, and Las Vegas was in the middle of an extreme heat stretch that week, with recorded highs of 108 degrees on August 6th, 109 degrees on August 7th, and 113 degrees on August 8th, the same day she disappeared. Neither of these facts explains what happened on their own, but investigators, and anyone trying to understand this case honestly, would need to weigh both a physical condition affecting her balance and mobility, and a heat level capable of causing disorientation on its own, against a video that shows a fall, a recovery, and a second collapse with no movement afterward. Before we go further into what's still unresolved here, if you want to see the coroner's findings the moment they're released, subscribing to CrimeWise is the fastest way to get that update. We're continuing to follow this case as it develops, and we'll have a dedicated update the day that report becomes public. What the footage does not do is explain how she ended up at that location in the first place, given that her stated destination that afternoon was a pharmacy on the opposite side of the city. It also doesn't explain who was operating her phone 4 days after this footage shows her last movement, a discrepancy investigators have never publicly resolved. The footage answers where and roughly when. It does not answer why she was there or what happened to put her on that path in the first place. The Clark County Coroner's Office has confirmed that the cause and manner of Alisa Goods' death have not yet been determined. That's an official statement, not an assumption on our part. And it means the most basic medical question in this case, how she actually died, remains open as of this recording. Until that report is released, everything discussed in this video sits alongside that gap, not in place of it. It's worth being direct about something else too. Las Vegas police have not named a suspect. They have not announced evidence of foul play. They have not opened a homicide investigation. Based on everything released publicly so far, there is no perpetrator in this case to reveal, no arrest coming, and no trial to report on. That may not be the ending some viewers expect from a case like this, but presenting it any other way would mean manufacturing tension the facts don't actually support. This is a case defined right now by unresolved questions, not by a hidden villain waiting to be exposed. That said, unresolved isn't the same as fully explained. A few specific gaps remain open, and they're worth stating clearly rather than glossing over. The first is the distance itself. Alisa Goods was headed to a CVS on Paradise Road and Harmon Avenue. She was found near Harry Reid International Airport, miles from that pharmacy, in a different part of the city entirely. Nothing publicly released explains how she got from one location to the other. The second is the 2-week gap before investigators reviewed and connected the surveillance footage to her, footage that had existed the entire time she was reported missing and searched for by her family and volunteers. The third is the phone activity itself. Even with police now favoring a spoofing explanation, that theory accounts for how the messages could appear to come from her number. It doesn't fully explain who specifically had access to it, or why the family's unease about those 4 days hasn't fully lifted, even with an official explanation on the table. Those 3 gaps, not a suspect, not a motive, not a trial, are what actually keep this case open. And as of now, only the coroner's office holds the piece of information capable of closing at least one of them for good. In the days after her death was confirmed, the family set up a fundraiser to help cover funeral and memorial costs. It had passed $1,100 within a short time, contributions from people who had followed the search and wanted to do something, even after the outcome they'd hoped for didn't happen. Alana Calloway spoke on behalf of the family shortly after Alisa's death was confirmed. She said their hearts were broken, and that they had been notified their aunt was found, though not in the way they wanted her to be found. She described it as an unimaginable time, one where words couldn't fully capture what the family was feeling. She thanked the public for the outpouring of love and support throughout the search, and thanked the media as well for helping bring attention to Alisa's disappearance while there was still a chance to find her. She closed by asking for continued prayers and for privacy as the family began to grieve. That's where this case actually stands right now. Not closed, not solved in the way true crime cases often get wrapped up with an arrest or a verdict. Alisa Goods has been found, and that alone ended weeks of uncertainty for her family. But the questions underneath that outcome, how she ended up where she was found, who had her phone, and what the coroner's office ultimately determines about her cause of death, are all still open. We'll be following this case as those answers come in. If the coroner releases a cause of death, if police offer any further explanation for the gaps we've laid out in this video, we'll cover it directly and follow up here on CrimeWise. If you want that update the moment it happens, rather than searching for it later, subscribing is the simplest way to make sure it reaches you. We'll be back with this case again, as soon as there's something real to report.